Down south, hood baby, make all the girls go crazy, go stupid. Look up, down to the side, why got me feeling a little lazy, shuffle, flex one hand, show the muscle, bring it around town, hit it out the park, two hands on her mouth like a muzzle. Down south, hood baby, make all the girls go crazy, go stupid. Look up, down to the side, why got me feeling a little lazy, shuffle, flex one hand, show the muscle.
Don't understand.
I do. I understood that reference.
Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we have a very long-awaited video. Exciting! We're gonna touch on a topic that I have talked about a lot before, but never really fleshed out. The idea of being a third culture kid, or a TCK. I really hope my fingers are up there in the right places. What exactly is a TCK, and why am I gonna talk about it in this video? So, first let's start with definitions. What exactly is a TCK, or a third culture kid? So the name itself is actually a little bit misleading. It sounds like someone with 3 different cultures, but no. The term actually refers to the creation of a third culture in between 2 or more different cultures that you grow up with or experience during your adolescence. And yes, the term does specifically refer to people who spent their adolescent development years from early childhood to high school, kids who grow up abroad due to their parents' job circumstance, like ambassadors' kids, missionary kids who just kind of jumped around from country to country and experienced all these different external cultural norms while maintaining specific cultural heritage within the home. So for example, I'm a third culture kid. My situation would apply to the idea of child who was born in one country, moved to another country during my adolescent years, and lived in a different majority culture while still maintaining that original culture within the home, my Korean culture. And this is pretty much often the case, that by experiencing these different clashes of cultures within themselves and within their external circumstances, their relationships, their schooling, that they'll take elements of their 2 or more cultures and they'll mesh them all together and create their own cultural identification, which may not necessarily fall into neat little categories or boxes like, oh, I am Korean Canadian, Korean American, fill in the blank. This is partly a reason I can't say that I completely relate to the Asian American experience, and why I can't seem to fully empathize with all of the different representation that's shown in media and literature. I talked about this in my last video, so I'm not going to do it again, but I wanted to explore this idea of what is it like to be unhyphenated, but not to be able to identify with just a single cultural identity either. I learned all this terminology in college, which was the first time that I actually decided to embrace and love my Korean heritage. Before that, I chose not to really engage with that part of myself, and I held a lot of biases against my own culture. I really just wanted to fit in wherever I went, and I felt like I identified more with this white Canadian, Western, whatever you want to call it, culture. None of this was really fully fleshed out in my mind until I went to college, until I joined this intercultural leadership development program where we not only got training for ourselves to work on our own identities, but engage in communication, community building, conflict resolution with international students and other TC in my college campus who grew up outside of the US. Through that, I learned a lot of things, like what it means to be a TCK. I met other people who couldn't define themselves or organize their identities into compartments. Even now, I don't really know what to call myself. In popular media, there are 2 categories of Asians or Koreans that are represented. The straight up Korean from Korea, native Korean, who mainly only speaks Korean. The term that I don't like anymore, I feel is pretty derogatory, is like the term fob, fresh off the boat. When a lot of Asian Americans, when we are together and we use the term fob, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a degrading way, but there is still a sense of othering against Korean natives. It creates a separation or a barrier, and because the 2 cultures are so different, it can be really easy to make ourselves out to be like we belong in different categories. Because I did maintain my Korean language, when I do meet a native Korean person, it's just more easy or tempting for me to speak to them in Korean and sort of pretend like this English speaking identity doesn't exist. So it feels kind of awkward to just like switch to another language, especially when there's this whole idea in Korea that, oh, like if you speak English, it's so cool, you're so like, different. So there's a little bit of otherness coming from Koreans too. In a dominantly English speaking country like the States, it can be really easy to feel a sense of superiority if you speak English well, which is a terrible mindset. And it feels even more like I'm betraying myself because I was once a fob. I once had an accent. Language and accent, those are other things that play a part into how others may view you. It's very natural for us as humans to see something familiar and kind of create an idea in our heads or an image about what that might mean for us in our own context. When people hear my accent, it sounds pretty American. And so immediately just from my accent, people can sense that A, I am not a native Korean, even though I am. I was born here. Legalities, passports, like what does that even tell you about people anymore? So even though I've always been a Korean citizen, by hearing my accent and my voice, you know, a lot of people just assume that I'm American. Or then they might think Canadian once I tell them that, because Canada is a place that exists. I used to have a Canadian accent. Apparently we do have an accent. I used to say big instead of bag. I actually did add a to the end of sentences. It's like a very subtle touch. It's like, the weather's kind of nice, eh? It's weird. Since I've been in Korea longer, once I indoctrinate myself in their culture, acting in a similar way, dressing in a similar way, it's very easy to hide. And I think we hide when we don't know how to fully embrace or express ourselves. Honestly, looking back, I say if you're not ready for that stage of putting all those parts together, or if you don't even know what that means, then I think it's okay to hide. I still get embarrassed and prideful at the same time when I'm asked to speak English in front of Korean people. Those are kind of just some of the daily identity wrestles. The reason maybe I don't relate to Asian American or Canadian immigrant stories is this festering bitterness that my parents actually never immigrated us. I lived on a visa the entire time, and that's really expensive. Being an international student for like 10 years, it's kind of why we grew up poorer than the kids around me. Middle class kids with like a proper house that their parents bought when like the real estate market was still okay. They were more established in their environment, which makes total sense because they grew up there. Their parents grew up there. I hopped around from rental to rental, knowing that I'll always be going to a new place. Well, it made me love traveling and adventuring, but it made it really hard to stay in one place. Being settled in Korea for now, even just this willingness to stay for more than a year is a big step for me. Leaving is easier, honestly. The biggest reason was that I was able to find a community at my church, an English speaking, this sort of weird hodgepodge of international community with all these different people from different backgrounds, and I'm learning so much from my friends. I hope some of that explains to you what a third culture kid is, why I don't feel like an Asian American. If you think that you're a TCK, or maybe if you're confused, leave a comment below. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more. I will see you soon.